Welcome back to the Fish Vet Files, Season 2. So, for today's case, if you've heard me lecture at any conferences or school groups, you've probably heard about Marco and Polo before. These lovely little koi were the only two koi in a pond that wasn't too big, about 800 gallons. They'd been together a really long time, and we first got called out just due to some slightly lethargic, not really eating behavior. Turns out they had some water quality issues, which with these guys, very easily fixed. Their filtration just wasn't quite strong enough to deal with two fish that, started this big, were now this big. So fish putting out waste at this size compared to this size, it's gonna be considerably more. So for those of you who have small fish that you know are gonna grow, make sure that your filtration can keep up with their waste. So anyway, we were able to fix that, no problem. And then noticed that one of the fish had a little bit of a buoyancy issue. So this is little Marco trying to swim. I mean, this might be normal if you're super hungry, mom's standing there with a shrimp off the side, but this was just a little bit too odd. So went ahead and looked at her belly, and unfortunately she had a lot of sores on her belly, which indicates she'd be sitting on the bottom for very long, extended periods of time. So went ahead and got her on some antibiotics, try to get those sores healed up, and trying to figure out how this fish had become negatively buoyant and stuck on the bottom. So after we were able to get her healed up a little bit, we took her for radiographs or x-rays. So this was before we had our own system. So thank you very much to the local veterinary hospital for letting us drag a fish down, carry very nicely, and a lot of water. I remember lifting the water in and out of my car and almost breaking my back. That's why I lift a lot of heavy weights these days, because I don't want to feel like that again. And then put her up on the table. They usually don't sit this well on the table. Just because her belly was so flat, she was just kind of able to sit there like a little sausage with fins. And come to find out that this is what her radiograph looked like. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with fish radiographs, radiographs or x-rays are great for looking at bones and the swim bladder, which should be full of air. And if it's full of air, it should be black in the middle of the fish's body, which she does not have. There's no swim bladder full of air on this picture. Well, there is a swim bladder. You can see it outlined very, very large, which is really weird. So that indicates that it's full of fluid or soft tissue. We've seen that too. So anyway, we took a sample out, and it was kind of just clear, yellow, acellular, a little bit of protein in there, but other than that, not very remarkable. So we pulled as much fluid out as we could and put air, just regular atmospheric air, back into her swim bladder. And she was able to be normal for a couple weeks. Unfortunately, in this time, the other fish now is floating at the surface. Well, to be fair, it's just his little butt is stuck up out of the water. He's able to get around okay, but for the most part, there's just he's not getting down. So now with him, we're gonna go look back at our radiographs. So you can see the swim bladder just fine, but what you also see is a ton of air in his little guts. So koi are physostomous fish. They have a duct between their esophagus and their swim bladder that allows them to suck in air from the surface and push it into their swim bladder. So in this case, this is a lot of extra air that he probably put in there himself for who knows what reason. They had been on a medicated feed a long time ago that maybe messed up his GI tract bacteria. But again, that was years ago. And with these guys, eating food from the environment, you'd think they'd be taking down their natural bacterial colonies again. So with this fish, how do you get this air out? Well, a couple different ways. essentially what we started to do is just feed them more frequently. So you take their diet, and rather than feeding once a day or twice a day, you start feeding more and mixing in some sinking food. So again, they're not coming up to the surface. And this would work some of the time. We also passed a red rubber catheter up the back end and just tried to get some of that air out. And it worked sometimes. I mean, he'd have some issues here and there. Sometimes the top of his tail would get a little bit red with some minor air ulcerations, but for the most part, he was doing okay. We'd see these fish about every 4 to 6 months just to do general health. Might need some antibiotics, some other treatments here and there, but we were at a little bit of a loss. Why, again, one was perpetually floating and the other one was perpetually sinking. So unfortunately, the owners were getting ready to move across the country, and they wanted to bring the fish with them, and then decided against it, which totally understandable. I mean, these fish were some very special needs fish. So they were moving, and unfortunately, they didn't want to leave the fish with an owner that maybe wouldn't take great care of them, and giving their perpetual issues, unfortunately, it was a quality of life issue. So both fish were unfortunately euthanized. It was one of the saddest days that you're trying to make these fish better and they're just in a horrible situation. The owners are doing everything they can and we just can't get them to the point where they need to be normal fish. So went ahead and did the euthanasia, and it was, again, heartbreaking. So like our fish in the first case, we sent them off to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Shane Boylan, who just has more experience working with koi, and I wanted his opinion on these funky little cases. So turn out little Polo, our super floaty fish, all of his intestines were severely distended. So it was very hard to move any sort of feed material through that, and why that had happened, I don't know. This could have been something he was likely born with, and just he got to a certain size where his internal organs couldn't keep up anymore. And then in Marco, again, this is the fish with the fluid full of swimbladder. The swimbladder full of fluid, backwards, went ahead, took a sample of this, and it tested for ammonia, which obviously that's a primary waste product of koi metabolism. Usually it's put, your kidneys do your thing, and some of it will move out through the urogenital system. Mostly it just moves out through the gills. But this fish has actually turned their swim bladder into a urinary bladder for some reason. We don't know why, essentially. I mean, there must have been a duct or something that was collecting it over many, many weeks to months. But, I mean, I don't know how I would have treated that. You would have had to gone in and basically just pull the swim bladder off the kidneys, which doesn't sound fun. And there might have been some separate issue that it was pulling it from the bloodstream. So, again, these fish, we don't quite know exactly what's been going on. But in Marco's case, again, our little Sinky fish, I have actually found one other fish that had this same issue. So, a little bit negatively buoyant. With ultrasound, definitely some fluid in there, but had some other weird GI issues. But since I'd had this case with Marco, I kind of knew what to look for. So we were able to pull some of that fluid out of the swim bladder, and if it's just, fluid from the water around, it should test the same as the water. Because again, you're testing all your pH, your ammonia, all that. But this actually tested positive for ammonia, which again, just like Marco. So all these weird things, again, we never really knew about koi, goldfish. Those fish that I see all the time, we're starting to catch some of those super weird, probably congenital issues that have been happening for eons, just nobody's taken a closer look at them before. So yeah, lots of weird things that we can kind of see in koi. Just another quick caveat, we had this koi, one of our lovely maintenance guys presented, that had this very suspicious lump on his back end. Now anything with a lump in the back, if you saw our first video, my little brain wants to start searching for ovarian cancer. So went ahead and did the ultrasound. It was air. It felt like an air balloon. So popped it up for radiographs, because what is better for air than a radiograph? And you got this picture. But again, we're looking at something that's just kind of in there. It's not in the GI tract. Looks like swimbladder, because again, it's got its little buddy here. Send it to our radiologist up at Davis. Looks like a swimbladder. Send it around to my colleagues, and my wonderful colleague, Dr. Greg Lubart, is like, oh yeah, it's a tertiary swimbladder. We see that from time to time. Oh, extra swimbladder. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. These arise from essentially the digestive tract, and sometimes weird things happen. So we've seen about 3 or 4 more of these. And yes, I know I have to write that paper, Dr. Lubart. I'm working on it. We're hopefully going to get this published soon, just so people and veterinarians are aware that this can happen to your fish. It's not a health issue whatsoever. Obviously, if we took that out, that fish would not be able to maintain their buoyancy. So it's just going to stay with a little lump in the back end, which is fine. So that concludes the case of Marco and Polo. I hope their parents are doing very well out there on the East Coast. We miss working with you, and I hope that you are doing well. We so loved working with you and your fish, and hope that we're able to teach other veterinarians and koi owners about their very unique health issues. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.